What even is a game? This is an important question because we can't design anything if we don't know what it is. Now, I want to open this section by saying I think all interactive art is valid artistic expression worthy of passion, study, and acclaim. But from a design perspective, interactive fiction, toys, simulations, and games all have different goals. Interactive fiction is primarily trying to tell a story, and it does so in an interactive way, but the storytelling is the point. This is most notable of genres like visual novels and walking sims. Toys are just meant to be fun to interact with, but there's no inherent goal. They should just generate engaging sensations when you use them. Yes, even those toys. You can use toy-like design in games, but that doesn't make games and toys the same. Simulations are, first and foremost, about creating a replica of the original experience without some of the key disadvantages of the real thing. War simulators simulate war without dying. Vehicle operating simulators let you control a vehicle without having to own them or risk crashing them, and so forth. And this brings us to games. Games are fundamentally about achieving goals, sometimes better than other players, sometimes against imaginary antagonists like Sephiroth or Ganon, and sometimes just against yourself, like many puzzle games. I think you can see how these are subtly different artistic objectives, but for simplicity, we're going to refer to all of these experiences as games for today, as the market on which you'd sell any of these experiences would basically be the same anyway. Also, in my day-to-day life, I also call them games, and I think pen and tree is generally useless, and some of the advice I have may even be applicable to all of these experiences. But I think it's a good distinction to have in mind when you're actually designing something, because you want to know what the end goal of the thing you're designing is. Affordances, signifiers, and feedback. In order to understand chemistry, you must first understand atoms, the most basic parts of chemicals. In order to understand games, you should probably understand affordances, signifiers, and feedback. Even if you don't know them by these names, I bet you probably already know them by concept. Affordances. These are things you can actually do in the game. Since games are often digital simulations, you have to be the one to design all the things you can and cannot do. Doors cannot open unless you say so. Doors also cannot halt movement or be collided with unless you say so. But this is most useful when thinking about the games in terms of game actions. When in the game can the player take actions? In Clair Obscur, you only act on your turn, save for parries. In Fear and Hunger and Chess, you only act on your turn. In All the Promised Burn, you can walk around when you aren't talking to people, but when you are talking to people, you can only make knowledge checks at designated moments, unlike in the real world, where your knowledge is always impacting you. The other thing to consider, what can the player do that the design intends for the player to do? And what can the player do that is unintended by the design? In board games, cards, for example, have the affordance that you can only see one side of them at a time. That's an intended design feature. But cards can also be thrown at your opponents, which is not usually intended by the design. Looking at you, Magic the Gathering. Signifiers. Signifiers are the way that players can tell what they could do. Going back to doors, they signify the passages players could take. But when they're closed or locked, they signify that the player cannot pass without finding a way to open them. For example, in All the Promised Burn, I once had a door inside of this star ray spine that was glowing, and so everyone thought they could go inside. But I had no intention to let them go inside. See, that's a bad signifier, and so I removed the glow, and now it doesn't look like you can go in. Doors in real life also have signifiers, sometimes elegant ones like bars you should push and handles you should pull, and sometimes inelegant ones like words. Words tend to be the worst kind of signifier. Consider how many signs on doors you've seen say push or pull, and people still don't know how to open them. Now, signifiers should never be confused with feedback. Feedback is the way that games react to the actions a player takes. Feedback might be obvious and immediate, like when I roll a die in my tabletop RPG, Little World of Fate, and it immediately shows me a number. That's immediate feedback on what I rolled. Or in a digital space, if I press a button to jump, I see my character jump. But feedback might also be more delayed, such as how enemy civilizations in Sid Meier's Civilization slowly increase their distaste for you as you build up your army until they officially denounce you, both as AIs and as other human players. Now, the most important thing about feedback is it correctly communicates to the player what is happening. For example, imagine an FPS where you click the shoot button at an enemy and the gun doesn't make a sound and there's no animation and the enemy doesn't even recoil from the shot. All that happens is a damage number appears. That wouldn't feel very good. Not to mention, if you're going really fast and missed the number, you wouldn't know if the game had broken. But you also need to make sure your feedback is encouraging players to take the kinds of actions you want them to take, and also that those actions are fun. We're gonna learn a little bit more about fun in tomorrow's video, but you know what else is fun? This sponsor of today's video, me! Hi, I'm sponsoring the content. Do you ever feel like the real world is a growing cavalcade of horrors and you're grieving the loss of what could have been, but you just can't rest and you just gotta keep going on living? Me too! I don't have a solution for that, but unrelatedly, you should wishlist my game, All the Promised Burn, my hand-drawn, knowledge-based RPG about an assassin finding new meaning in her world after the war ends. The war has ended, but the fighting hasn't stopped in your heart. Can you learn new ways to be, even when the past is burned into you? Wishlist today for free on Steam and itch.io. Back to the video. If we assume that fun is the goal of the game, or more realistically, engagement, you want your players to be engaged, fun is relative obviously, then you need to be able to make your own goals and form heuristics. What does this mean? A goal is something that a player wants to do. Win the game is probably a pretty good one, but they probably also form smaller sub-goals along the way. Keep your health from hitting 0. Increase your stats in an RPG. In All the Promised Burn, the player wants to make their knowledge stats go up as high as possible. Meanwhile, a heuristic is a set of actions that the player anticipates they can take in order to achieve said goals. It's sort of like a strategy, but it's even more basic than that. Strategy implies they have a more complete idea of how they'll tackle various obstacles. Heuristics are the pieces of information they'll use to achieve that strategy. For example, in Dungeons & Dragons, players might know in order to kill a dragon, they need experience to level up. So they go to a town, and they kill a bunch of rats there to help them out, and this will gain them experience to level them up to kill the dragon. Going to kill rats for XP is the heuristic. Now, how does this tie into affordances, signifiers, and feedback? In order for players to form a goal, the game needs both the signifiers to indicate what the goal is, this could be as simple as telling them, or as complex as creating a symbol for the goal, building up the goal with a story, and putting it on a map somewhere for the player to navigate to it. And the affordances to achieve it, so the players don't try to achieve something they literally can't do in your game. And then, in order for them to have fun while pursuing said goal, they need feedback from the game in order to know which heuristics are driving them to said goal. For example, for a beginner in chess like me, even though I know what all the pieces do, I cannot form heuristics about how to actually checkmate the king, nor do I even know what intermediate goals I should even try to form, other than perhaps to capture more of the enemy's pieces than I lose. But even then, I still don't have good ways to do that. So I kind of end up just moving pieces in legal ways and hoping something good happens for me. That's not fun, and that's not really making interesting choices. Moving pieces around randomly isn't fun. What's fun is thinking 5 moves ahead and planning for every eventuality, and then winning or having to adjust your strategy based off of your opponent's moves. This isn't to say, by the way, that chess is a bad game, but if chess were invented today, it would not catch on very quickly because you need to know a lot about the game in order to properly play the game and have heuristics in it. You probably couldn't afford to make something as complicated as chess today without really good onboarding and tutorialization, aka it'd be hard. In contrast, however, playing chess digitally with a website or a real-life coach telling me, okay, if you move there, you're going to begin to control the center of the board, which will prevent your opponent from developing good defense. But if you move over here, you'll be threatening their queen, and that's a more aggressive but riskier playstyle. Even having an IRL coach also talk me through multiple chess games would offer more immediate feedback on each of my moves, and would allow me to enjoy chess more because I'd be making choices. So think about this with the games you are making. How do the players know what to do, and can they make informed choices about pursuing that goal? In fact, I think I've heard it said before, but making choices interesting is the key to making a game engaging, aka fun. Alright, that's all for your very first game design class. I hope you took good notes. Your assignment for today is to go play a game, and as you do, identify the affordances, signifiers, and feedback in the core gameplay loop, and then analyze how first-time players might form heuristics around them. Bonus points if you end up doing it for one of my games. Your essay should be 800 to 1,000 words, and I expect them on my desk by 9 a.m. Tomorrow, we will be discussing engagement and how to make games fun. Alright, class dismissed!